Hey everyone. Okay, so I should be working my dissertation because it's due in a month, so I should be studying the mint. But I'm so upset about this that I can't concentrate on it. So I wanted to talk about this and kind of get it off my chest in the hopes that I can then calm down and go back to studying bimetallism. And this topic is the quantity theory of money, which has been well, there's a couple things that econ Twitter has been arguing about recently. One is whether they should read their own books or not, which I think is really funny. And the other one is about the velocity of money, which is kind of a tricky concept. So what I have to say touches on both of those things, and I want to begin just by saying that look, economists have an enormous amount of power in our society, and they have an enormous amount of power to make us suffer, and they're very cliquish about the conditions under which they allow anybody to participate in their debates. And so there's a lot of gatekeeping and all the rest of that. But economists are astoundingly bad at thinking critically about their own concepts, and they're often either ignorant or lying about the intellectual history of their own discipline. And this stuff is really important. So I want to encourage all of you out there, don't take bullshit from economists. They really don't know what they're talking about. They have some defense mechanisms. They're good at making you feel stupid. But that's just how Econ 101 works. But I would encourage you to don't be intimidated by economists, because it's really important, because they have so much power over us. And obviously, very, very central to some of these political concerns about economics and money is the problem of inflation. And it is the problem of inflation that the quantity theory of money kind of deals with. And so anyway, so if you read the literature in monetary history, right? So I mean, just like books about coins and stuff, you will often have to endure some very dry and uninteresting passages about something they call the quantity theory of money, okay, which is MV equals PT. We'll talk about that in a second. Now, that's what they call it, right? They say the quantity theory of money, MV equals PT. This is what I've always thought of it, because that is what it is called in the literature that I'm most familiar with, which is not economics, but monetary history. Apparently, in the economics department, they do not believe that the quantity theory of money is MV equals PT. That is something they call the equation of exchange. And apparently they learn in the economics department that first there's the equation of exchange, okay? And this equation is necessarily true. It's a tautology for reasons that we'll talk about as we go on. Okay, so nobody can argue with this. And the idea is that's where we need to begin in order to ask about how changes in the supply of money might impact the price level, which is obviously an issue of pressing importance if you're a monetary authority trying to deal with inflation or other kinds of changes to the price level. You might want to have a theory of this. Okay, so in the economics department, you learn that first of all, there's something called the equation of exchange, and this is different from the quantity theory of money, which is an application of the equation of exchange, which happens to be false. Okay, it's not empirically true, and so we're told, well, it doesn't matter whether the quantity theory of money is true or not, because everybody knows that it's not really true. But that doesn't matter because the equation of exchange is different, and that's necessarily true. So we can still use that and make some use of it. Now, what use we're going to make of that is a little unclear for reasons that we'll get to. But what I want to start off by showing that this claim in itself is just not true. Okay, the equation of exchange is the quantity theory of money. It's masquerading as something different because they've redefined the quantity of money from what it used to be. So the equation of exchange is, well, really the equation of exchange is the quantity theory of money, and what they call the quantity theory of money, which is a more narrow claim, is the application to which this equation of exchange was originally put by the people who first developed it in the 18th century. So anyway, so I'm gonna show you why this is the case. And the easiest way to say this, and somebody made a helpful comment on Twitter that kind of really showed me that this was the answer, right? The easiest way to see this is just to consider the units, okay? So let's think about the original quantity theory of money as it was developed in the 18th century. Now what's the purpose of people developing this? Well, the people who are developing this basically want to argue, okay, that something like, well, if you double the amount of money in the economy, there's just going to be inflation. The prices of everything will get twice as big, and so nothing really happens, right? So they want to kind of present a view of a kind of sterility of money in terms of its real effects, and right, and so they argue this thing, right, which is basically that, well, there's going to be a direct proportion between the amount of the money supply and the price level. This is what they now call the quantity theory of money, and that is indeed sort of the rhetorical purpose to which it was originally put. Okay, but what I want us to see now is that there's some missing units here, and so basically, so if we think about the units, so we have on the goods side of the equation, we have transactions, and that's transactions per time, so it has units in per time, and we have price, which is a unit in money, and we have money, which is also, of course, a unit in money. But what happens now if we solve the equation by dividing through for transactions and solving for price? Well, now we get the idea that m over t equals money times time, okay, equals p, which is money. So those units don't match, okay? So really, in the supposed classic quantity theory of money, m equals t times p, okay, this m variable really has units of money over time, okay, money over time. So that way, when we divide through by transactions, okay, time cancels out, and we get two units that are both really denominated in money, and so then the units balance out. Okay, so in the classic version of the quantity theory of money, in order to make the units match, in order to make the units balance, the m term has to have units in money over time. Now, the equation of exchange is not different from the quantity theory of money. It is simply an elaboration or a disambiguation of the quantity theory of money that draws out these different units into different terms, okay? So what the equation of exchange calls money is not the same thing as what the original classic quantity theory of money called money, because it has to have different units in order to balance out, okay? Now, implicitly, what's happening in the classic formulation? Well, implicitly, the assumption is that v is a constant, okay, and so that there's just some ratio, and that it balances out. That's an implicit assumption in the classic quantity theory of money, and the equation of exchange abstracts away from that assumption to say, well, it may or may not be true that the v term is constant, and this is going to explain the fact that, just sort of obviously empirically, the classic formulation of the quantity theory of money doesn't work, because it's not the case that if you double the money supply, prices double. It just doesn't work. Just doesn't work like that. Can't explain things. So nobody claims this today, right? So according to what you learn in the economics department, apparently nobody believes in the quantity theory of money at all. Okay, but what I want to show is that the equation of exchange really is just the quantity theory of money that's pretending not to be. And what is the history of this? Well, the history of this we can see when we look at Irving Fisher. Oh, I have to reshare my screen, I guess. So if we flip over here to Fisher, so here's the text from 1911, where Fisher is developing the equation of exchange. And what is he doing? Well, he's very clear here, okay, that he is elaborating the quantity theory of exchange by disambiguating the m term, okay? And he's doing so in order to save the quantity theory of money from what seems to be a political threat, in which the bad guys, according to Fisher, are making use of the quantity theory of money, and this is leading the bad guys. This is leading the good guys to abandon it. And so Fisher wants to elaborate. He says these attacks upon the quantity theory have been rendered easy by the imperfect comprehension of it on the part of those who have thus invoked it in a bad cause. Okay, and we'll get to what that bad cause is in a second. But Fisher's basic point is to say what I just showed you, right? Which is to say, look, this M term in the quantity theory of money is really two terms. It's really MV, okay? And when we recognize that, when we show that the M term is really MV, we can rescue the quantity theory of money from the bad uses to which, well, that have been the basis of arguments for unsound currency schemes. Okay. Now, what is Fisher worried about here? Well, he's essentially worried about a version of what we would now call the sectoral balances hypothesis, right? So the MMT people, what do they say? Well, they say, look, there's an accounting identity between the public sector debt and the private sector surplus, and so it would be good to have more money because then there's more growth. Okay, this is basically what these unsound currency schemes are arguing. So what are they arguing? Well, they're saying, well, if M equals PT, it's not necessarily the case that if M goes up, that P goes up, right? It's not necessarily the case that there's inflation. It might be instead the case that T goes up. And so then, expanding the money supply would stimulate the number of transactions. There would be more transactions with the same level of price. And so it wouldn't cause inflation, it would cause growth, right? So this is a problem because the quantity theory of money has originally been introduced, okay, in order to make an argument against weak money policies, to show why increasing the money is just going to increase the price level. But here, the weak money people are making use of the quantity theory of money, right? They're saying, well, if there's more money, then T is going to go up. And so what is Fisher saying? Well, he's saying basically these people, the weak money people, have misunderstood the quantity theory of money, and the sound money people, who should use the quantity theory of money, have decided to abandon it because they don't know how to save it from the chartalists, right? Who are trying to make use of it in order to export to support monetary expansion. And so he says, well, so we're going to, he says the quantity theory will be made more clear by the equation of exchange, which is now to be explained. And this is just where he shows that there's also this V term, right? That money in the M versus PT, M equals PT equation has to be money over time. So it's ambiguous about whether it's a stock or a flow. And this was the problem for the original quantity theory of money. But we can actually fix this, and we can save the quantity theory of money from the chartalists, from the weak money politics, okay, by adding V back in. And V is going to allow us basically to tell a just so story about anything we want, right? The quantity theory of money, once we understand that money is really a money over time variable, okay, is necessarily true. And we can use this argument against the people who want to use the identity to argue for monetary expansion, because we say, yeah, you increase M, but that's not going to do what you want, which was increasing T. And even though it doesn't do what we previously argued it was going to do, right, which was increase P, that's still okay. Our theory is still true, because really what's happening is that there's this unobservable half of the money term, the per time term, that's changing, and that's explaining why you can't do what you want to do, even though the reason that we previously had for why you couldn't do what you wanted to do has been shown to be empirically false, right? So here's the point, which is that the sound money people always need some kind of story about why there has to be sound money. Okay, and the first story was this classic quantity theory of money story that implicitly assumed that V was a constant and bundled it into M. Okay, but the units are still there because the units have to be there in order to make the equation balance out. Okay, so they implicitly assume that V is a constant. They say, well, if you increase the amount of money, there's going to be inflation. Well, it turns out that this seems not really to be empirically the case, and so people then lose their fear of inflation. They say, well, if there's more money and there's not inflation, then it must be the case that the economy is growing, the T is increasing, transactions are increasing. Isn't that what we want, right? So if it's been shown that this naive version of the quantity theory of money is not true, then doesn't that mean we can do MMT? Doesn't that mean we can goose the money supply and increase T? And so the sound money people need an argument for why this isn't the case. And they find this argument in creating the modern equation of exchange, which just unbundles the variable. It just says, well, that old m was really two variables, not one variable. There's m, which is a pure stock variable, and there's v, which is a flow variable, and v, which we can't actually observe, okay, is going to be whatever has to be necessarily true in order to make the equation work. And this is why you still can't, okay, this is why you still can't get what you want from expanding the money supply, okay, even though this other theory that we had is now shown not to be true. Okay, now this has deep consequences, because what is V really? Okay, really? Okay, so let's begin with the naive theory of the quantity theory of money, which basically, even though the units in the equation have to be money over time, the naive thing, you don't understand that. You think that money is just a stock, and so you think if the money goes up, well, okay, so that's the naive quantity theory of money, and that's empirically not true. Okay, so but what is V? V is a coefficient that explains the degree to which the quantity theory of money is not true in any given situation. Okay, so that is what makes the statement, the equation of exchange, a tautology, because it is really just the quantity theory of money plus a variable that measures the extent to which the quantity theory of money is not true in any given situation. So if you adjust your theory by a variable that says that is defined as the extent to which your theory is mistaken, you will get a necessarily true statement. Okay, this epistemologically, this is no different than Ptolemaic geometry of assuming that the motion of heavenly bodies is circular, and then adding in extra terms into your equation in order to describe in terms of more circles the precise degree to which the motion of heavenly bodies fails to be perfectly circular. Okay, so it is tautological in a bad sense, which is that there's no way that we can begin with the equation of exchange in order to derive anything except for V. V is the only thing that we can use the equation of exchange to derive, because otherwise we would have to know in advance the extent to which the quantity theory of money fails to describe some particular situation. Okay, but that's what we're applying the quantity theory of money to measure. That's V. V can only be measured by knowing everything else in the equation. Okay, assuming you know what money is and what counts as money, and assuming you can measure all of the GDP and everything else, and then the velocity term is what would have to be true in order to make this work out. But there's no way that you can know in advance what V is before you've done this, and so that way you can't use it to predict anything else. Now, can you create a theory of V that would be something other than an application of the quantity theory of money? Okay, so for reasons I've just explained, right, the claim that the equation of exchange is different from the quantity theory of money is disingenuous, because really it's just the naive quantity theory of money with a variable that explains the extent to which the theory is wrong, and that's necessarily true. But if we have no, if the V term is a residual and we can't measure it and we can't theorize it, then the equation doesn't really tell us anything. There's no use for it except to sort of congratulate ourselves with the fact that we can look at data ex post, apply a wrong theory to it, and then measure the extent to which the theory wasn't right. But this doesn't help us very much. So we could have a theory of the velocity of money, okay? But in order to know this, we would have to have a theory of the structure of the system of exchange. So we would have to know not just how much money there is, but where in the economy the money is being created, right? And what power relations that the entity receiving the money has with other entities. And this matters because it's going to determine the degree to which a clearinghouse is subject to external drains. Okay, so there's basically the V is potentially infinite. Okay, there is no limit to how large V could get, because if you had an economy in which all transactors were members of the same clearinghouse, and if this clearinghouse were able to balance the overdrafts of its various parties that are participating in the clearinghouse, right, then you wouldn't need any money at all in order to do any arbitrary number of transactions. So to the extent that all of the transactions in the economy are arranged in such a way that they can be cleared through a clearinghouse, there is no need for money at all. So V can become infinite. So the question is, to what extent is the economy or not structured in such a way that all transactions can be accommodated through the clearinghouse rather than creating an external drain on the clearinghouse? And this means that the clearinghouse would have to drain reserve money. And so it's the extent to which the clearinghouse is subject to an external drain that determines whether it needs money or not. If it's not subject to an external drain at all, doesn't need money at all, V can become potentially infinite. And so what does the equation do? Well, the point is, it doesn't do anything unless we have a theory of the structure of the monetary economy. So it's not a problem in statics. Okay, we can't just make an equation and say, here's what it looks like in equilibrium, and we're going to balance it out, and hooray, we've made something necessarily true. I mean, yeah, you made a true statement, but you haven't explained anything about the world, and you're never going to explain anything about the world until you begin by asking what the structure of the system of exchange it looks like. Okay, where money is flowing, and then asking if there's new money being created, if there's delta M being created, where in the economy is that being created? And there's nowhere in the equation of exchange in which any of this detail is captured except for V, which is a black box where you just insert reality and it makes your equation true. Okay, but you need to think about class relations. You need to think about power. You need to think about structural asymmetries in the monetary system, because that determines the extent to which the relationship between M and V. Okay, and all of this is very important. I think it's interesting in itself. I mean, I think it's particularly interesting, right, that Fisher originally introduces this V term. He feels the need to disambiguate the concept of money in order to respond to the early 20th century's versions of MMT, who are saying, look, we can intervene into the real economy through expanding the money supply. And he introduces this in order to show that they can't. Okay. So anyway, so the point here is that the idea that is apparently being taught in economics departments, that there is a difference between the equation of exchange and the quantity theory of money, that just is the version that the quantity theory of money takes today. Okay, because nobody can defend the naive view of the quantity theory of money. So what do these theorists do? Well, they say, yeah, we know that the quantity theory of money is wrong. And what we do is we measure exactly the extent to which it's wrong in any given situation, okay? By first assuming that it's true, observing how the world differs from what that would predict, and then labeling that V, okay? And then it's true. But there's nothing about this. I mean, and whatever happens in the world, you can just sort of say, oh, well, we're gonna use all this new data that we're getting every time the world is revealed to be different from what the theory would predict. This is just new data for the theory, so we can just update V, and every time we're proved to be wrong, it's just new data that we can use to learn about V. But at no point here are you constructing a theory of V, which would require having a kind of like structural geographical view of the monetary economy. Okay, you can't begin with a closed economy and a closed national economy. You got to begin with the foreign sector. You have to begin with the state. All this kind of stuff, right? So you need to begin modeling an economy that has a class structure has a political structure, has a geography, and in which new money can be created in different places, and where this money is created matters. Because if you're making new money, okay, if you're dropping new money into the middle of a clearinghouse that is not suffering an external drain, nothing's going to happen. It doesn't matter because the clearinghouse doesn't need the reserves. There's no external drain. So yeah, in that case, everything's just going to be swamped out by V. But this wouldn't be the case if you're making new money in a different location. Okay, so there's a spatiality, there's a spatial organization of the monetary system that is also a class structure, that's a political structure, and eliding all of this, making all of this disappear, all of this class structure stuff is the job of economists. Okay, their job is to make all of this violence and antagonism and the class structure in the monetary disappear, and there's just a lump of stuff, and there's an amount of money, and then there's this V term that makes it all true, and then you go and mock any people who have the temerity to conflate these things. But the point is, there really is no difference between the equation of exchange and the quantity theory of money. One is just an elaboration of the other. Fisher is very explicit about that in the text where he introduces this, and he's also very explicit about the fact that he's doing this in order to make sure that the quantity theory of money can still be useful to the sound money men, who are the enemies. That's enough for now.